So the new Netflix movie Metal Lords focuses a ton on heavy metal. But do you have to be into that genre of music in order to enjoy this angsty musical drama? Two misfits form a metal band and must contend with school, parents, hormones, and teen angst while trying to get along long enough to win the battle of the bands. So I'm pretty sure in one of the opening sequences, Jaeden Martell is wearing this exact same flannel shirt. Now, if he is, that means that the production, they spared no expense in attaining the $12 Walmart special. But hey, you know what? I like it. Feels great. So this is a teenage drama that's centered around heavy metal music. We've got Hunter, a hardcore rocker with a ton of knowledge on all things metal, at least old metal music. Now, I'm not really sure about his knowledge on the recent stuff, but I'm going to get to that later. Hunter tries to convince his friend Kevin, who's shy and quiet, to join the band that will consist of just the two of them until they can find a bassist. This search, which seems to be a priority only in very small moments, leads to Kevin talking with another shy student who he overhears playing the cello. Now, once he gives her a bit of the sheet music to try, I instantly wanted her in the band. If you're talking metal, it was absolutely metal to have this cello chugging away at this opening riff. Isis Hainsworth plays Emily, the cellist who Kevin tries to recruit for the band. And when she plays, it's spectacular. It transforms the music and takes something from decent to freaking amazing. Now, Kevin and Hunter are the misfits of the high school, but I'd say Hunter is more of the misfit by his own creation rather than being targeted that way by everybody else. There's some antagonism that he encounters, like in any school setting, but on the whole, the majority of the ill will that he receives comes as a result of his own actions. This movie feels like it was written by someone very nostalgic for the old metal days, but who is completely unaware of any current metal. I thought this was actually taking place in the 80s or maybe early 90s based on all the band references and callouts, but then it is clearly set in modern day with some of the other music that's highlighted that's not metal, the technology that's shown, and then even the cars. The movie is filled with very choppy storytelling, feeling like all the transitional scenes were cut, leaving only sequences that were then slapped together for the story. Now, I like what's at the core of this story. There's a search for belonging while maintaining your own identity. And the refusal to conform, I think, is wonderful. But the execution, that's what needs some finessing. Almost all of the relationships in this are stunted and dysfunctional, but without too much context. Jaeden Martell's Kevin has a pretty antagonistic relationship with his mom. But why? Other than he's a teenager and that's just how they're supposed to be? The dynamic between Hunter and his dad is terrible. And while I can see how some of it would come about, the level of antagonism makes them both come across just as tantruming 3-year-olds. And this then contributes to Hunter's meanness to just about everybody else. But it's also such a stereotypical view of the metal scene, and that they're hostile and unfriendly. Now, throughout the entire movie, I was very curious at why the movie chooses to make the protagonist absolutely unlikable. It makes it then very difficult to root for them when the story calls for it. I've gone to countless metal shows with my boys, and honestly, those audiences are hands down way more nice and genuine than what you'd find at some adult pop show. Because I've also been to a Neil Diamond show, and there is nothing more unpleasant than the wine-filled 50-something that feels that they should be in the spotlight. At the metal shows, when the pit starts or the wall of death begins, it can get violent, but it's not mean. I've seen it so many times where someone will take a tumble in the middle of the mosh pit, and then tons of moshers are right there to pick the person up and make sure that they're all good before continuing in the mayhem. This movie paints metal as angry and mean, like that's the only way to be metal. I just found that stereotype to be off-putting and then wildly inaccurate, seeming like it's written by someone who appears to only have a view of the scene rather than ever being a part of it. And as a side note, a lot of heavy metal artists are classically trained. Their musicianship is phenomenal. Now sure, it may sound like just a wall of noise coming from the stage, but when you look at the crazy note combinations that they put together and the skill at which they play, it is amazing to watch and definitely should be appreciated for the high level of ability that it is. Now within this, there is some great character growth that I think is wonderful to see, especially in Hunter. But the progress and the shift, it's never shown, making the change in attitude very abrupt and then shallow. Now, part of the entire arc of this is to illustrate how Hunter can become more accepting, more open, and making him a better person overall. I love that we get to see the result, but the journey isn't there, so the result isn't earned. Now, there are some cameos in this, and the scene was unexpectedly funny because of who showed up for the cameo. But the scene leading to that one makes zero sense. There's this wedding going on, and a band is playing the reception. And then all of a sudden, several people are skinny dipping in the pool. Huh? It's like they didn't know how to make the movie edgy, but wanted it to be rated R instead of PG-13. So they tossed in some nudity to push the rating. It was just so out of place for what the movie was. And my criticism isn't with the nudity, it's with the context for the nudity. And there were other opportunities that would have fit way better if they were intent on showing some TNA. But that's also right in line with what this movie is. It's all over the place, it's disjointed, and suffering from a bit of an identity crisis. And this idea of a battle of the bands, I mean, just like the musical references, this feels like it's trapped in the 80s and 90s. There's no mention of making it big on social media or going viral on a platform that would then propel them to stardom. Nope, if they can win a school's battle of the bands, then they'll have made it. It's just all a bit out of touch for a story that's placed in today's world. Now, the music is awesome, although there were a few times that I was wanting a bit more variation within the choice of metal songs that were being played, especially when one or two of them were repeated multiple times. Now, when we finally get to the Battle of the Bands, I'm glad we get a decent amount of Hunter's band playing, but I wanted even more. I mean, they sound amazing, and it would have been great to showcase the talent for longer. So overall, Metal Lords, for what it is, it's just okay. The pacing is very uneven, making a relatively short 97-minute movie feel way longer than it is. The music is great, and I like what the story is trying to convey, but to make the character so unlikable for so long and then have a very abrupt transformation left me unsatisfied with the character growth. It suffers from a bit of an identity crisis, wanting to highlight how good heavy metal can be, but choosing to ignore anything current in the scene. The story feels very much like it should have been placed in the 80s or early 90s instead of today's world, leading to this feeling out of touch and stuck in the good old days. Some of the humor works, but the driver is really the relationships, which unfortunately don't get the time and effort they deserve. There's no sex, some nudity, a ton of profanity, and some violence. I give Metal Lords 3 out of 5 couches. So what's the craziest concert that you've ever been to? Now, one year at Warped Tour, I got to catch Gwar. That was a wild show. But let me know what you've seen in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.